Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Adam Kligfeld's weekly Rashi study class.
And to the podcasters. Okay, we are in chapter 4 of the book of Shemot, very close to a story we've kind of been anticipating for a while. We're like a half a verse away. I have us midway through the Rashi, on verse 20, verse 22. So to remind us, chapter 4, verse 22 of the book of Shemot, if you're it's the Torah Chaim, Rukod Kedolot. 1 second, just letting people enter. It's on page Nun. V'amarta el Paro. This is God's speaking to Moshe again. We discussed several times how it seems to be an interesting weaving together of scenes where this extended conversation between God and Moshe, then it seems that Moshe leaves, and then God and Moshe are still talking with each other. V'amarta el Paro. You should say to Pharaoh, God says to Moshe, Ko Amar Adonai. This is what God has said. B'ni B'chori Yisrael, which we discussed at great length how to translate, including whether just the order of the words. My child, my firstborn is Israel, or Israel is my child who is my firstborn, and does the order matter or does it not matter? And I think we got halfway through the Rashi, and just to get moving with the beginning of Rashi is V'amarta el Paro, when God says to Moshe, you should say to Pharaoh, and Rashi is Keshetishma shalibo chazak v'me'em lishloach amor lo kain. When you hear that his heart is hardened and he refuses to dispatch the Israelites, you should say thus. And we discussed that this is Rashi saying that we haven't heard God, we haven't heard in the anticipation. 1 second, someone's joining that I'm not exactly sure who it is. Let me just see if it's the right person. 1 second. I don't recognize that number, but maybe it's Sharon Grab from Israel.
Yeah, Sharon is supposed to be joining this morning.
Okay, so I hope this number that I don't recognize is Sharon. So far, she hasn't joined the audio. When she joins, we'll see what happens. Sharon, is that you who just joined?
I am putting in my name.
Yes. Okay, good. Just making sure that it's you and not some bot who's trying to get into the session. Okay. It can't be that the first thing that Moses says to Pharaoh is the next two sentences. God has said, my child is Israel, and later on in verse 23 it says, and you neglected, you refused to send the Israelites. So Rashi says that it must be that God is saying to Moses, this is not the first thing you're going to say to Pharaoh. The first thing you say to Pharaoh is, let my people go. He's going to refuse, and then you come back to him with this. So he's just dealing with that basic fact and order problem in the verse. And then the one that we were in the middle of discussing, B'ni B'chori, what does this language mean, B'ni B'chori? The first thing Rashi says is Lashon Gedula. Don't just think that the word B'chor means firstborn. It doesn't just mean primacy in order. It can mean primacy in import, the language of greatness, Kemo. Ani B'chor et Nehu, and that's where he finished. And there was a verse from the book of Psalms that I want to share with you. Excuse me. We were in the middle of looking at this when class ended last week, and I shared with you the challenge of looking at proof texts that are translated into English, because the translation of the text in English may be a translation which undermines the reason why this verse is being used as a proof text. So the JPS translation of Psalms 89, verse 28, Af ani b'chor et nehu, God is speaking about King David. I will even not give him here. Notain means to appoint or to place him in the position of, I will place David in the position of Bechor, which is translated into English as firstborn, because that's how firstborn is usually translated. But the way Rashi is using it is to say, David was not the firstborn anything, right? But when God says, I'm going to place him as a Bechor, I'm going to place him high up in import, Elyon l'malchei aretz, above all other kings of the earth. So according to Rashi, that's a good proof text for our verse here. What does it mean when God says, B'ni b'chori Yisrael? Not making any kind of claim that Israel was the firstborn. Firstborn what? What does that mean? First to emerge as a nation? I mean, no. So what does it mean? First thing Rashi says is primacy. Primacy in terms of import. They are the ones who are most important to me. You can imagine how this line of thinking has been, a troublesome thorn in the side of Jews and their interactions with non-Jews when trying to explain what we think our relationship with God is and whether or not there's anything singular or better about the Jewish people. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but this is one of those texts which is a pathway to that rabbit hole. Okay, all of that was review, and then we're halfway through the Midrash, the Rashi. I don't remember who was reading last week. Let me just read this Rashi quickly, and then I'll assign someone for the next one. Umidrasho. This is an occasional Rashi tactic, or actually, I skipped a word. Zepshuto. This is the pshat. The pshat is Bechor means the most important. Umidrasho. But I want to share with you a Midrash. I'll remind you all for the 150th time that Rashi is always sharing a Midrash, or almost always, and he almost always doesn't tell us that he is. This is a way of saying the Midrash I'm about to quote from you is a lovely interpretation. I don't think that that's really what the verse means, but I want to give it to you as a gift. Umidrasho, Kan Chatam HaKadosh Baruch Hu al Mechirat HaBechorah Shelakach Yaakov Me'esav. This is the moment, according to this Midrash in Breshit Rabbah, that the Holy One, Chatam, signed on the document, right, ratified on the sale of the firstborn that Yaakov had taken from Esau. That's what the words mean. Someone tell me what you think the Midrash and the Rashi comment means. The words mean that this is the moment in human history where God signed on the dotted line for the sale that Yaakov had for the birthright that Yaakov had taken from Esau. What do you think is going on in the verse? Leonard, Rebecca?
Good morning. Well, I think what the Midrash is saying is that that's where Jacob got primacy over Esau because he became like the firstborn and he became superior in rank, so to speak. I wanted to add one other thing, and that is there's actually a word in English that comes from the same root as Bechor, and where the meaning is superior or premium and not firstborn. And it's a word that I think we all are familiar with. The word is albacore, as in tuna.
Meaning it's from like like an Arabic root, albacore?
Right.
And it means the best tuna?
Well, there's different theories on what it means, but that's one possibility, yes. Or it might mean it's a really big tuna.
I had no idea that's what albacore comes from, but I should have, because there are a lot of English words that begin with al that are from an Arabic root, like algebra, even Albuquerque. It sounds like it's Native American. Albuquerque is actually almost certainly from an Arabic shoresh. So add albacore to the list. Wonderful. So the first thing that Leonard said is that this is a completion of the process that Yaakov began with Esav. Let's say more about that. What's been the status of that scene of the steal of the birthright, right? And again, remember, the birthright is not the blessing. This is not the end of Parshat Toldot where Yaakov dresses up to pretend to be Esav. That's the blessing. This is when he steals from a famished Esav the lentil stew, the pottage, or he gives the lentil stew and the pottage in exchange for the birthright. What do people make of what we're supposed to think now midrashically of the status of that sale in between then and now? I see Norm, and then Barry, and then Larry, Diane.
Well, the glaring problem is that neither Esav nor Yaakov Yisrael has until now been thought of as God's firstborn. One of them might be Jack and Becky's firstborn, but God is very different from them, I hope.
Say more. I'm not sure if I'm following the thrust of what you're saying.
If God is going to say, tell Pharaoh that the people Israel, or even their ancestor Israel, is my firstborn, my problem is, how is that his firstborn? Maybe Adam was his firstborn in some sense, but why would it be Israel? To say it's got primacy, that's a reasonable interpretation, but having anything to do with the one-time dispute between, or the current dispute between Esav and his brother is, to me, very unrelated.
Uh-huh. Okay, so I think on some level, Rashi is agreeing with you that the primary, no pun intended, way of understanding the verse is through import, not order. But must be a reason why Rashi is invoking this midrash, and I want us to think about what mini sermon Rashi's giving by going out of character to say, yeah, this is what the verse means, but let's linger on this juicy midrash a bit. Barry?
Well, it goes back first that God had told Rivka that of the twins in her, that one would be have the primacy, but the negotiation and the lentils, this was between the two brothers. God was silent. Only at this time, God is acknowledging that this is true.
Good, and by inference, maybe we're supposed to imagine that in between then and now meaning the scene we're in the Torah, it's not clear how God's going to weigh in on that, right? Is God going to ratify that sneaky way of becoming the firstborn, or is God going to suspend approval of it? And even if the Midrash says in this scene, God comes down and says, yes, I retroactively approve, it's interesting to think about a midrashic notion of the generations in between, where the Holy One, the creator of the universe, was not quite ready to say, I put my stamp of approval on what you did, Yaakov, right? So this is simultaneously, I read this Midrash and Rashi, and it's like a simultaneous approval and disapproval of Yaakov, right? Why is it an approval? Because God's saying, okay, yes, I sign on it. Why is it a disapproval? Because it's been generations since then, and God was holding God's judgment. Not sure how I, God, feel about this being the way that my people are going to get to the top, right? Ultimately, God says yes, but it took a long time. Larry, Diane? If you're talking, I don't hear you yet.
Sorry. With respect to God's chotemet, Barry said what I was going to say. So I think that the question that I think that's the answer there. God had not put a seal of approval on it at the time, and He's doing so now. With regard to the etymology of albacore, with all due respect to Leonard, my etymological dictionary says it comes from the Portuguese albacora, which comes from the Arabic al-bakara, which we recognize as milk cow. And the tuna is called that way, not because it's a bachor, but because it's more like a cow, bakar.
It's a kuf, not a kaf.
Yes, we should have seen that immediately.
Yes, got it. Next time I buy tuna, which I don't do anymore, I'll buy it with a kuf. Interesting.
I just want to add something in there.
Please.
So the concept of Bachar involves not only status, but also certain kinds of privilege. Typically the firstborn received a double portion of inheritance. So this is saying something about Israel's entitlement, I guess. which is in some ways very problematic.
Yeah. Joanna, I think that there's even a typo in your correction of your typo. I think Chaf got changed to Chad, is my guess.
Yes, thank you, Zoom autocorrect.
But can you just say a little bit more about the what you're chatting about, and then we'll get to other hands that are up?
You're talking to me.
I was talking to Joanna.
Joanna, okay.
Do you want to expand on that, Joanna?
Sure. So, barring the Zoom autocorrect, so I'm referring to the two letters, of course, Chaf and Chet. There are two words in Hebrew, Bachor, spelled differently, that mean different things. So Bachor means choice or chosen. And the other Bachor means firstborn. So here we're sort of switching the meanings, is what Rashi is basically suggesting, that Bachor, we should think of it more as the chosen one. And it's interesting that both of those words are used both in Psalm 89 and in the Yaakov story, which may be why, having already had the reference to the Yaakov story as an additional reference, Rashi brings Psalm 89.
Wonderful. I did not pick up on the other Bachar in Psalm 89. What verse is it in? I'll share my screen so we can look at it together. That's a nice pickup. I'm looking for it myself. I don't see it. Okay, when you
verse 20.
Verse 20. Az dibart b'chazon l'chasidecha v'tomar shiviti ezer al gibor harimoti bachur me'am. The one chosen out of the people. Very interesting. Yeah, I've often wondered, without being able to resolve it, and I have not done the deeper research on it, as to whether or not it's just a coincidence that the homophones Bachar and Bachar can certainly be used in the same conversation, right? They're not synonyms, but they're connoting similar ideas. So is that just sometimes there are etymological or morphological accidents, or could they be emerging from a deeper root way back when that somehow got expressed in two different versions of the hard chaf? Remember that the soft chaf, that the chaf back then was much more different than it is now, right? If you're speaking to a Yemenite, a Jew, right? The bechor is just a different root than bahar, because the chet is much more guttural. But sometimes it's inescapable to think about the ways in which those two roots are cousins of one another and also sound the same. Wonderful. Stevie.
Yeah, going along those lines about those terms sort of blending into each other, I was thinking in the bikurim, right, the first fruits, right, there's a machloket as to whether or not they're the first in terms of being chronologically first, or if they're first in terms of being like the first pick in the draft, right, like the best.
Right.
And
very good, right? So I think we mentioned bikurim last week.
I wasn't here last week.
No, it's okay. I'm just connecting what you said to what we were saying, that it's one of the places that sometimes the root bet chaf reish appears with a hard chaf, and sometimes just because of the grammar and of the word, the kaf is dagesht. So it's bakar, levaker mashuhu, with a kaf, not a kuf, means to make something more important. And a bikurim are, as Stevie said, as we learn in Parshat Kitabo, are the fruits that either ripened the first or were thought of as the choicest ones to bring to the altar first around Shavuot. So good. So even in that scene, you can imagine Rashi saying this is either order or significance or both. Wonderful. Joel.
Can I share a screen?
I can, let me make you a co-host and you can share a screen 1 second.
Just a short video. I don't know, I'm a West Wing fan and this just strikes me.
Okay.
So I'm setting up the scene. This is after the president's secretary got killed in a car crash, and he's ranting at God right after the funeral of the church.
We don't hear the volume, Joel.
Joel, you got to share computer sound.
How do I do that?
I've got to do that, or he's got to do that?
Joel has to do that. It's on your share bar.
Share computer sound.
What did I ever do to yours but praise his glory and praise his name? What did I ever do to yours but praise his glory? What was Josh Lyman? A warning shot? That was my son. What did I ever do to yours but praise his glory and praise his name?
So, in other words, Josh Lyman was his assistant, was someone in his staff, and he was killed. He was hit by a attempted assassin, and he's saying Josh Lyman was my son. Well, Josh Lyman wasn't his son, but he's saying he was as if my son. As if it was my son. He's trying to create an analogy, some sort of equality between you trying to kill my son and what did I do to your son except praise his glory and praise his name. So I think the same thing here. Whoever the Aaron Sorkin was who wrote this was just trying to justify me killing your firstborn is because you didn't release my firstborn.
Very nice. And a really nice connection between the way firstborn is going to play out in the couple chapters, right? So, and it's interesting that Rashi doesn't go there, or if he does go there, doesn't make it explicit. He doesn't say explicitly this the significance of Israel being now claimed by God as a Bechor, right? Ratifying what Jacob had done to Esau, looms so large for the scenes that are about to come. But that's a wonderful pickup that you made. I was going to say something else. Oh, in common speech, we play around with familiar relationships colloquially, right? Like there are definitely people in my life for whom I complete a text or my email like "See you later, my brother," right? We and in Hebrew all the time, "Ma kora achi," what's happening, my brother. So we do use familial relationships, brother, cousin, sister, to refer to someone who is maybe more endearing to us or with whom we have a more endearing relationship than other people who are not related to us. And it's an elevation. It's an elevation to call someone your brother, right? And it's a beautiful, I've forgotten that scene, but it's an elevation for President Bartlett to call his Josh Lyman his son. Great. Let's see. Rebecca Menace.
Good morning. I was again also because looking ahead to what the threat would be in the next line, which is to kill your firstborn. To me, it feels like we should be interpreting this as the first son, and in terms of a son, I would think that here Israel is being assigned the role of the first people to have a relationship with God. So in that respect, they are like a firstborn. Mm-hmm. And so just in an effort to keep it simple and not go into Israel being Jacob and elevate it, might be just simply the first people to have a relationship, because that is what he's saying to Pharaoh, let them go so they can worship me. They can, follow up on this relationship.
Wonderful, Rebecca. I really love that comment. You're basically doing what Rashi could have said but didn't say, right? Another way of joining the two usages of the word is that they're about to be a Bechor, in the sense the first people who are going to worship me as I deserve to be worshipped, right? And we know that we've talked about it. There's a lot of birth imagery with the Exodus, right? Going through the divided Red Sea. That is very, or Sea of Reeds. That is a very birth imagery, right? So on the other side of that, who's been born? Bechor Yisrael on some level, and as Joel and forgot already who just reminded us, Joel did, on the backs of the elimination or the targeting of Bechor Mitzrayim. So Bechor is going to have a lot of play literally and conceptually as you imagine the birth of the nation. Listen, Pesach. Why is Pesach a new year? Right? Rosh Hashanah is one of the odometer switches in our fantastical counting of since the beginning of time. That's when the earth was created. But the Jewish people were born Pesach, right? And that's why it's the first month in the counting of the Torah. So there's definitely birth imagery throughout that story. Norm, and then we'll go on.
As you mentioned earlier, the chosen people concept has been controversial for a long time, and I'm wondering if Rashi might be saying to the local bishop in Reims or wherever, golly, this is just talking about the dispute about Yaakov and Esav, and you don't have to feel threatened by it.
Nice, very nice, Norm. Okay. Anything else on verse 22? Let's go to verse 23. Let's see someone we haven't heard from. Judy, are you willing to read verse 23 for us? Va'omar alecha?
Yes, I am.
That's so nice to see you, Judy.
Same here for everyone and for you. So, okay, 23. And here I go. Okay, tell me.
Chapter 4, verse 23.
Wait a minute. You're in Shemot 4:23?
Correct.
Okay, I'm all the way ahead of you. Maybe you should have someone else read.
Sure? You'll
so
get
I can. Well, okay, I'm in chapter 4 now. Thanks for your patience, everyone.
Of course, Judy.
Ve'emor elecha shalach et b'ni ve'av ve'ibtitani av ve'tima'en v'shilcho hine anochi horeg et bincha bechorecha.
Okay. So you can translate that?
Forgive me because I am not seeing so well. Okay. I have said to you.
And who's the I in the verse? Because there's a lot. This is another verse in the Torah. We have quotation marks within quotation marks within quotation marks.
Who is the Hashem?
I? Yeah, it's certainly, as Rashi could help us in a second, it means Hashem, but the one who is actually speaking is Moshe, right? Because the previous verse is God saying to Moses, you're going to say to Pharaoh, this is what God has said.
Yes.
That Israel is my firstborn. So Va'omar elecha, and I said to you. Well, we'll wait for Rashi to resolve it, but either could mean I, Moses, whom speaking to you right now, Pharaoh, said to you, or I, Moses, am reminding you that God said to you. Okay, Shalach et b'ni v'avdeni.
My son and my servant.
So Shalach et b'ni, I said to you, send my son. And it's vayavdeni. If Eved here were a noun, it might have been servant. It's in a verbal form, and
I will work.
And remember that avad can mean both work in biblical Hebrew and worship. like the avodah service, right? So I said to you, Pharaoh, release my son so that that's why it's singular, because there's reference to Ben, he will oved oti, he will serve me. Release my son Israel so he will serve me. Vatima'en lishalcho.
And you have refused is that it? And you have refused to send? No.
Yeah, exactly right. You have refused to send him, right? And this is explaining the Rashi from the previous verse that says, well, then this can't be the first interaction between Moses and Pharaoh that God is anticipating, because already by this scene that God is anticipating, which obviously hasn't happened yet because it's a prediction, there's already been a refusal to send. So God is saying that Moses is going to say to Pharaoh, you refuse to send Israel, whom I asked for. And now what is God's response?
And I will kill your son, your firstborn.
Good. So the pshat does what Joel was speaking about in the previous verse, that Rashi doesn't, not that he doesn't pick up on it, but doesn't play with in his commentary on Bechor, that there is a mirroring here. God is going to say through Moses in his encounter with Pharaoh, not the original encounter with Pharaoh, but after Pharaoh had refused, if you're not going to release my Bechor, I'm going to kill your son, your Bechor. So there is a symmetry between verse 22 and 23 regarding Bechor and what's going to happen to the firstborn. Good. Questions on the verse before we jump in the Rashi? Anything that jumps out at you in the language, the structure, the content?
Well, the one thing that comes to mind immediately is that we learn that eye for an eye is not literal, and yet here it seems to be literal. Yeah.
Interesting you mentioned that. I'm of the many ways that I'm committed to Torah study, I've been doing Daf Shvu'i, the weekly page of Talmud through the conservative yeshiva in Jerusalem for many years now. One day maybe I'll have the patience to do Daf Yomi, and I praise anyone who's doing it now. It's not the pace that I'm comfortable at doing it, so I'm doing a page of Talmud a week, in addition to other stuff that I explore. And right now we're in the part of the Talmud in Masechet Bava Kama that's actually dealing with the very derivation of that law. And how did it come to be that yad tachat yad and ayin tachat ayin, hand for a hand and eye for an eye, was interpreted by the rabbis to mean money and not an actual corporal punishment. And it's interesting to see the development of that idea. We've inherited the result of that development, but it's interesting to see the rabbis say it's not so clear that we're not supposed to take it literally. And yet here in this scene, in the narrative part of it, God is saying a very literal equation between what you refuse to do for my Bechor and what I'm therefore forced to do to your Bechor. Good. I'll point out while you're thinking of any other questions in the verse, anybody, that the Unclus here helps us with that word vayavdeni, because Judy is right that vayavdeni could mean to work, or to work for me, or to do labor, and he translates it not to the Aramaic word for work, but the Aramaic word for worship. Va'amaret lach, you should say to him, shlach yat beri, send my son. Beri is bar, right, as in bar mitzvah. V'yiflach kadamai, he will palach, pei lamechet. Pei lamechet in Aramaic is to worship. And he will worship kadamai, in my presence. Good. Anything else on the verse before we look at the Rashi? Going once?
There's a whole line of people.
Oh, sorry. I was scrolled down and I hadn't seen any of them. Now I see them. Larry Diane, go ahead.
This is a tense verse. By that I mean, look at the different translations.
Okay.
JPS, I have said to you, let my son go that he may worship you, yet you refuse to let him go. Now I will slay your firstborn son. I now read Kaplan.
What was the first one you read?
That's JPS.
Okay.
That's what's in Sfaria. Now I read Kaplan, who says, I have told you to let my son go and serve me. If you refuse to let him leave, I will ultimately kill your own firstborn son.
Which is Aryeh Kaplan's way of saying he rejects Rashi's previous comment, right? Because the driver of Rashi's previous comment was the sense that there hasn't been a refusal yet. Aryeh is reading the verse to suggest, yes, there's been a refusal. I mean, correct, there has not been a refusal yet. Okay, go ahead.
And now alter. And I said to you, send off my son that he may worship me. And you refused to send him off. And look, I am about to kill your son, your firstborn. So almost every permutation of how you might tensify, or whatever the term is, put in different tenses, the verbs are used here. And
I just got your pun. I'm slow in the uptake. You said it was a tense verse. I'm like, it's tense. Not more than tense than any other verse. Got it. Okay.
And I just want to make one more comment, because I know others will talk about this, and I have no resolution, and I haven't read the commentaries yet. But I want to make a note. I think this is the very first time that what I personally, and I know no offense to anybody else here, I personally take as the connivingness of God in this story. It's the first time we're told, we're only asking you to let us go out and worship. We're not asking you that we want to get out of here, which is what God told Moses at the very beginning. He's going to rescue his people. And this is the first time, and then it comes back later on. And if you read carefully the buildup of all the Esamakot, you'll see that basically Moses and God were disingenuous in how they were approaching the poor Pharaoh, who was being manipulated.
Yeah.
Misled.
There's something else here, and that is that God is implying that he's actually directly talked to Pharaoh, and we haven't seen any evidence of that. It's all been through Moshe. So,
except that, remember, this is all a prediction, right? This is all.
My wife. It's actually it's Moses is the I here. It's the continuation of the previous verse. So Moses is saying, "And I said to you."
But he's saying it in the, but it's the what we call the super perfect. I will have said, because it hasn't happened yet, right? The context for this is that Moshe is not yet in Egypt, but God is. It's like the coda of the burning bush is God saying to Moshe, "This is what's going to happen." And in that scene, when it happens, you will say to him, either Rashi, "I asked you to leave and you refused," or Aryeh Kaplan, I'm asking you to send them out, and should you refuse, this is what's going to happen. But it's all in a predictive mode. None of it's actually taken place yet. As we're comparing translations, Everett Fox, I said to you, send free my son that he may serve me, but you have refused to send him free, perfect tense. And he adds in the word so in parentheses. He wants the so to be added in front of the word here, hine. So here, I will kill your son, your firstborn, ! And he translates Bechor, firstborn here, and firstborn in the previous verse for that symmetry. Rick.
Thanks. So, yeah, it's a prediction, but it doesn't happen. God, through Moses never says it like this. He says, Shalach et ami. He doesn't say Shalach et bani. And he doesn't do the bani v'chori Yisrael either. It's just not there. So do any of the commentaries mention that? That how this scene is anticipated doesn't actually come out to be? Yeah.
Well, whenever you ask, do any of the commentaries mention that, I'm always at a loss, because I don't know them all comprehensively. But you're right that if we graph on the scenes at the burning bush and at this coda onto what's actually going to happen when they get to Egypt, it's not a 1-to-1 match. Correct.
So nobody's ever brought it up or commented on it that you know of? Yeah.
Again, I can't answer whether or not anyone has ever, but many people have recognized that we have this long, not a prophecy, but a anticipation, a preview as to what's going to happen in the individual scene. And if we just go up one level, the way the Torah tells the story is that the encounter that God predicts will happen between Moshe and Pharaoh happens bigadol, but not every specific detail happens the way it's described in advance in the burning bush. Correct.
Yeah. I just think there's something going on there. It's the same thing. Moses was worried about how the people would react, and they just believe him. By Amen. It's like one word. They believe him, and he was worried that they wouldn't. So there's something there to anticipate something that doesn't ever happen. That's part of life. I don't know. I'm not a rabbi to make a grand statement about it, but there's something going on here that all this dialogue, all this stuff, and it doesn't happen that way. So you have to deal with life the way it is, I guess. I don't know.
Let's hold that. Maybe we'll come back to it when we actually get to those scenes and see how different they really are. Ilan.
Yeah, I noticed that many of the commentators translate it in the conditional that if you don't let my people go, I will kill your firstborn. I think that is because that makes them comfortable, right? Because it gives Pharaoh the option. And it bothers me that people insist on making a translation that makes them comfortable. That's not what it says. In fact, what it says is predictive, which is, I am going to ask you to let my people go. You are going to say no, and I will kill your firstborn. And thereby leaving Pharaoh no choice, right? Because if somebody comes to me and says, here's the deal, this is what it's going to look like, I'm going to be like, okay, if it's inevitable anyway, I'm going to do whatever I can to battle that. So you're going to throw all this stuff at me, and I'm going to push back against it. To me, it's very troublesome, and I'm willing to live with the troublesome concept. I don't think you have to gloss over everything that's troublesome to make it palatable.
Yeah, it's a very astute comment, and that comment now gives a greater engine to the Rashi we're going to get to on this verse either this week or next, because I had not, I'll give away a little bit of the punchline. I had not, until you said this, one thought about whether or not the reason Rashi makes the comment he does is because he's troubled by a supposition you could make about the scene if he doesn't read it that way. And so it makes his comment a little more harif. So thank you for that. And we'll see if we get to it today. Tova.
I wanted to comment on the echoing of the phrase et bincha bechorecha, which echoes the beni bechori earlier.
Yeah.
Because we spent some time establishing what that bechori part meant, and that it could mean, and Rashi suggests that it means elevated. I just wanted to throw in that, in point of historical fact, pharaonic succession was not automatically primogeniture. For much of Egyptian history, there were certainly many times when the eldest did succeed, but it was not automatically assumed. There wasn't a crown prince per se. And in the 19th dynasty, when this would historically most likely have been placed, all the more so because by that time the pharaohs had very large harems, many, many sons, and it would almost be the most historically accurate to suggest that the heir is not your firstborn, but the one that you have elevated. So in fact, the interpretation we gave for Rashi fits the latter part of this verse very well.
That's fascinating, Tova. Thank you so much for that, because what you've done is taken the lyricism of Beni V'chori compared to Bincha B'chora, B'chorecha, and you've said that historically it may be that the very question of why Israel could be called Bechor even if they weren't the first actually very much mirrors what was happening in ancient Egyptian society.
Yeah.
Great. So illuminating. Thank you. Norm.
I think this is possibly a verse that should be taken very much at face value, that the threat is just to Pharaoh's firstborn. Doesn't need to be the firstborn of every human and animal and perhaps plant in Egypt doesn't need to be preceded by 9 other plagues. It's just a threat at Pharaoh's firstborn or elevated one or most important ones even, but not necessarily, could be the whole leadership, but not necessarily a plague affecting everyone, every family in Egypt. And I think that's, it's a shame that it didn't come to pass, because it's entirely possible that all they had to do was kill a very small number of people, and Pharaoh would have said, "Get out of here."
While I'm thinking about that comment, I need to readjust where I am because my computer is about to run out of battery. So hold on, I have to move to a different part of my office where I have unplugged. But that's really interesting, Norm. I wonder, and you don't have to answer, Elon, but I wonder how that comment changes the potential discomfort of the verse to think about that if we are indeed saying that God is predicting, if not even making happen, Pharaoh's refusal, the only thing at stake at the time was not the destruction of the entire nation, but not that this is a small thing, was the direct eye for eye, right? Israel, the people, is my firstborn. Your son, or the one you've chosen to be your successor, is your firstborn. And right now, those are the only 2 things that are at stake. And depending on how you act in the interim, might impact whether or not other people suffer. So it's interesting. I never read it that way, Nora. That's really interesting.
It doesn't change my perspective, because I still don't think that he's giving Pharaoh the option. Yeah. I still read it as he's saying this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So whether we're talking about just killing Pharaoh's firstborn or the firstborn of all Egyptians, it's still predictive as opposed to conditional.
Correct. If we read it as predictive, it's still problematic. But it's what Norm is offering is it possible for us to read this as much narrower? If we didn't know the rest of the story, which we do, could we read this scene as understanding that Pharaoh's being personally threatened, which is different than the entire nation of Egypt suffering for his recalcitrance? Joanna, Barry, and then let's see if we can get into that Rashi that we've been anticipating.
2 quick comments. The confusion over the pronouns in this verse and are they God, or is that a reference to God or to Moses, is interesting in light of what we read a few verses ago when God said, Vatati elo le'elohim. So again, this whole intermixing of what does that mean? And the other thing I just wanted to point out is the end of this verse could have been Ve'anochi horeget bincha bechorecha. So what does inserting that hine add to the verse? It's always interesting to me when those hines, which seem to call attention somehow, the nuance and the shade that adds. And I had this thought even before this whole long line of comments that we had. And in every translation that has been read, hine has been translated differently. So it's just sort of fascinating what that hine is getting at in this verse.
Yeah. The hine is translated by Onkelos to ha, which doesn't help us, except that what ha doesn't mean in Aramaic is a direct translation of the Hebrew hine, but it's some kind of an interjection that is supposed to impact the flow and the timing of the verse. Yeah. Okay. Barry.
Well, simplifying this section here and the grammatical tongue twisters that are included in here. This is like a spoiler alert that God's talking to Moshe. We use the word predictive, but it's a spoiler alert. So it's a tight summary. Moshe will anticipate what's going to happen. No one's talking to Pharaoh yet, and those details will play out later and open up. But this is just a tight spoiler alert summary.
Right. So then the question, and particularly as we think about Norm's comment, or Rick's comment about how this actually plays out, and Elon's comment about whether Pharaoh's given a choice, it's helpful to be reminded, as Barry just did, and that we talked about when Diane was speaking before, that this hasn't happened yet. This is God telling, and Pharaoh isn't even being informed in this verse, right? Just to remind to you, Elon, Pharaoh is going to be told pretty harshly that on some level he doesn't have a choice here, but not yet. In this verse, the only one hearing this is Moses. We are witnessing, Moses is hearing from God. This is what God says is going to happen. And in that scene, Pharaoh is going to hear this message, but he hasn't heard it yet, right? Good. Thank you for that, Barry. Judy, are you up to reading the Rashi, or do you want me to take that for you? You still there, Judy? Yeah.
She's not in her head, yes.
Yes, you want me to take it for you? Okay. So in the interest of time, let me just read this Rashi because I want to get to it because we've been focusing on it. So Rashi says two things on this verse. The first is a three-word comment. Ba'omar alecha, dealing with who's speaking here. And I said to you, Rashi is answering the question, who is the speaker here? Is it Moses? And the answer is b'shlichuto shel makom. That yes, that I, Moses, in my role as a messenger of God, makom here is the omnipresent. God is everywhere. I, Moses, will have said to you, it hasn't happened yet. Okay. Shalach et ami hine anochi horeg. So the dibur hamatchil, the words upon which Rashi is commenting, and I'll add it again, maybe, because the diburei hamatchil were almost certainly added in afterwards by editors. So it's a guess as to whether or not Rashi was specifically speaking about these three words. But if we take the diburei hamatchil at face value, we're supposed to read the following comment as a comment on the flow of words of the sending of my son and or send my son from Egypt, and the threat of what's going to happen, the very part of the verse that's bothering Elon and perhaps many of you, Vegomer. Hi Makkah Achrona. This is a reference to the 10th plague, right? It's the final Makkah. Again, a nod to norm, right? And only the 10th plague. Rashi is weighing in a little bit with these words Achrona, suggesting that there will be others before this, but this is a laser focus on the last one. Uva hitrahu techila. And with this, and this, Elon, I'm be interested in your thought on Rashi, he warned him in advance. Hitrahu is a warning, right? So you were reading it as a certainty. Rashi's reading it, maybe because he's troubled by the same thing you're troubled by, saying, no, this is actually a warning. Mipnei shehi kasha, because it's so harsh. He warned him because the punishment that is coming might be just but harsh. V'zehu she'amar. And this is what is we've said in Breshit Reb in a different source. Hein el yasgiv b'kocho. This is a quote from the book of from Job. Let me share it with you. I have it up. Okay. Book of Job. You know the basic story of the one who suffers as a test of his faith. And we have this verse that's taken way out of context from the story of Job that Rashi is quoting as a proof text. Once again, I'm just amazed at the extent to which Rashi literally knew every verse of the Bible by heart and could recall it in its intricacy as a way of making an interesting proof text. Hein el yasgiv bekocho. Behold, another hein, God is exalted in his strength. Segev means to be like different and exceptional. Mi chamohu moreh. The translation by JPS here is who governs like him. You could read the mi chamohu moreh, meaning who is like God as a teacher, moreh, as an instructor, as an illuminator. So if I'm going to reread this verse the way Rashi is reading it in English, sort of, since God is so powerful, there is no one like him as a teacher. He has to be, or it's amazing the extent to which he's a teacher and a revealer given his strength and power. How does it work in our verse, according to Rashi? Lefichach, therefore, mi chamohu moreh, who is like him as a teacher from Eov? Basar Vadam. Imagine a human person with authority. Hamevakesh lehinakem lechavero, who wants to enact vengeance upon his fellow, maybe even deserved vengeance. Ma'alim et dvarav. He doesn't tell him in advance. He conceals what he's going to do to his friend or his non-friend. Shalo yivakesh hatzalah. Once he's at the point of vengeance, when we're at the point where we realize that we're going to take a revenge on someone, we're not going to let the person know because we want to be able to enact that vengeance. We don't want to give them a heads up. Aval Hakadosh Baruch Hu, but the Holy One, blessed be He, because He is so strong in His power and His vengeance is so vicious, He becomes a moreh, a teacher and an illuminator. Aval Hakadosh Baruch Hu yazgiv b'kocho, very, very powerful. Ve'ein yacholet lehimalet miado, and since there is no way for the person on whom God wants to take revenge to rescue himself or herself, except ki'im b'shuvo elah, except through tshuva. This is very Book of Jonah-ish, even though the quote is from Job. Lefichach humorehu. Therefore, God, because He's strong, because He's powerful, because, I keep using He, but I'm not intending to, because God is everything, and God knows the impact that the vengeful act will have, God becomes a moreh, instructs the object of the vengeance in advance, umatrebo, warns him, lashuv. Meaning, and Ilan, you can reject this, Rashi is reading this verse as saying, look at God's beneficence. God tells Pharaoh what's going to happen in the future so that Pharaoh has a chance to do tshuva, which we know he doesn't, but at least he was told how horrible it was going to be. If we were plotting against somebody, we would want the plot to come as a surprise so they couldn't wriggle out from it. Okay. Ilan, you get the right of first refusal here. What's your reaction to Rashi?
So it just strengthens my perspective that Rashi is trying to make this interaction more palatable.
Yeah.
I'm curious whether you can think of an example where Rashi looks at a verse and says, this is troublesome, and that's it. Like I'm okay with a verse being troublesome. It's fine, right? But it seems to me that, and I've only been doing this since the beginning of Shemot, that every time there is a troublesome verse, Rashi tries to find some justification for it, and he's unable to accept that it's troublesome.
Yeah. Ilan, you're definitely onto something, and those of us who've been in the class long enough to remember some of the Yaakov Esav commentaries, and even before that, the Yitzchak Yishmael, it is the case that Rashi, and not alone, sees himself as a defender of the text, and a defender of the Holy One, and a defender of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And if given a choice to read Jacob positively and Esav negatively, he's going to. And given a choice to read God sympathetically or God harshly, for the most part, Rashi is a inheritor and a passer on of a tradition that is wont to read God positively, but not without ever levying a critique. So I think that in general, you're right. And by the way, in general, I sort of sympathize with that, right? Like I want to be an honest reader of text, but I want the impact of my teaching as a rabbi to be that the people that I'm studying with walk away as proud worshipers of the Holy One and proud inheritors of the characterological inheritance that our ancestors gave to us. Part of what we've inherited from them is that they are flawed, and that God changes God's mind and God apologizes. But in general, we want to be embracers of that tradition. And rabbis like Rashi and those before him and after him saw that one of the ways they can help their community embrace that tradition is to paint things in a way that is as palatable as possible, but not by never levying meaningful critique against either God, which, by the way, is remarkable because most religious traditions do not have their intellectual history representing critiques against the Holy One, right? It would be considered blasphemy even to say that in Islam, even in moderate Islam, right? And this is not a critique of Islam; it's just a statement about it. It's to say anything about other than the utter glory and infallibility of God, of Allah, is blasphemy. Right? That is not our way, but we still do see Rashi choosing to soften what comes off to us rightly as harsh. Tova, last comment of the class?
Complicated. I think at heart I agree with Ilan, but I also can't help thinking about my own human experience of counseling people at certain times who have had ongoing patterns that were self-destructive, and using terminology like, you are going to do this again, and this is going to be the consequence to you, as if it's a statement of fact.
Yes.
When in fact, it's not something that I want to see happen to them. And I realize this gets into a theological morass in that we can perhaps think in terms of, well, then what about God's omnipotence, knowing what's going to happen? But if you treat human free will as a wild card, in a sense, he could be stating a fact of this person's character and traits, but free will might allow the potential of Pharaoh changing his mind and therefore changing what is coming.
Extraordinary. Extraordinary, Tova. There's a between now and next week, if you want to, there's an extraordinary comment that was obviously composed by Harold Kushner, who was the editor of the Midrash of the Drash part of the commentary in Eitz Chaim Chumash. On one of the places where it says that God hardened Pharaoh's heart in Parshat Bo, I believe, maybe it's in Ba'era. Rabbi Kushner wrote a relatively long note at the bottom explaining something very similar to what you just explained, that the way we can get out of the pickle of saying that God punishes Pharaoh for something that it seems God did to him is to suggest that good behavior and negative behavior become habitual, and that in the beginning it was, you look closely, it was Pharaoh hardening his own heart. By the time we got to the fourth and fifth plague, when we says that God hardened his heart, what we should understand by that is that God created a world in which if you continue to make the same mistake over and over again, it'll become so habitual that you'll not be able to walk away from it. Anyone who's ever struggled with a behavior or an addiction or something that they can't stop doing recognizes that. Patterns are hard to break. And so we read from the fifth or sixth plague on, God hardened his heart. Not that God went like this, but God created this way of being a human being, and his heart was hardened beyond return because he had done it to himself so often. So Baruch Shekivant, as you connect that idea to something that Rabbi Kushner wrote, you can find that comment in the Eitz Chaim. I forgot what page. All right, sorry for the 3 minutes extra, and sorry for having to switch positions mid-class, and have a good week. Kol Tuv.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.